The world looked different in 2045. Not the flying cars and robot servants that people once imagined. Instead, it was a world where water had become more valuable than gold, where entire cities had been swallowed by rising seas, and where governments fought secret wars that ordinary people never even knew about. Deep beneath the desert sand in Nevada, something extraordinary was happening. A place that didn't exist on any map, where the most ambitious project in human history was taking its first steps. They called it Ghost Class, and it was about to change everything. Dr. Eleanor Rodriguez stood in her sterile white laboratory, watching screens that showed faces from all over the world. She had spent 3 years of her life preparing for this moment. Once, she had been a simple military doctor, helping soldiers deal with their fears and nightmares. Now, she was something else entirely, something that kept her awake at night, wondering what she had become. The project was simple in concept but terrifying in execution. Take 100 people from around the globe, people who wouldn't be missed, people whose disappearance would create no ripples in the world, transform them into something beyond human capability, create the perfect soldiers for a new kind of war. The selection process had taken months. Intelligence agencies from every major power had contributed names. Former Special Forces soldiers who had gone rogue, street fighters who had survived impossible odds, survivors of conflicts that had destroyed their families and left them with nothing to lose. Each person chosen for their unique combination of physical ability, mental toughness, and most importantly, their isolation from the world. These weren't volunteers stepping forward to serve their country. These were people being plucked from the edges of society where no one would notice if they vanished. A homeless veteran living under a bridge in Detroit. A former child soldier wandering the streets of Mogadishu. A cage fighter in Bangkok who fought for food money. Each one represented a different type of human potential pushed to its absolute limit. The facility itself was a marvel of engineering and secrecy, built across multiple underground levels. It contained everything needed to reshape human beings from the ground up. Training rooms that could simulate any environment on Earth. Medical facilities that looked more like science fiction than reality. Living quarters designed to break down individual identity and rebuild it according to military specifications. Dr. Rodriguez had overseen the psychological profiles of all 99 selected candidates. Each file told a story of human resilience pushed beyond normal limits. These people had survived things that would have broken ordinary individuals. They had learned to live with violence, to trust no one, to expect nothing from the world except what they could take by force. But there was supposed to be a 100th candidate. The file showed a former Navy operative named Chen, someone with perfect scores in every category they measured. His transport was scheduled to arrive with the others, completing their carefully chosen group of human weapons and training. Instead, something went wrong. Not the kind of dramatic explosion or shootout that people imagine in movies. Just a simple mistake. A tired clerk inputting the wrong address. A driver picking up the wrong person. The kind of human error that happens every day, except this time it happened to the most secret project on Earth. Tommy Rivera had been working the night shift at Valley Community College for 3 years. At 28, he wasn't where he had imagined his life would be. But he wasn't complaining either. The pay was decent, the work was honest, and it gave him time to take care of his elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, who had no family left in the world. That Tuesday night started like any other. Tommy was finishing up in the science building, making sure all the classrooms were clean for the next day's students. He took pride in his work, even if others might not understand why. Every spotless whiteboard and perfectly arranged desk represented his contribution to these kids' education, even if they never knew his name. The students knew him, though. He was the guy who would help carry heavy equipment, who would unlock doors when professors forgot their keys, who would listen when someone needed to talk. Tommy had a gift for making people feel heard, for seeing past their problems to the person underneath. He was wheeling his cart to the storage room when the van pulled up outside. 3 men in dark suits, the kind of people who looked like they had never smiled in their entire lives. They walked with purpose, checking clipboards and speaking into small microphones clipped to their collars. Tommy assumed they were some kind of government inspectors. The college got them sometimes. People checking on federal grants or student aid programs. He continued with his work, not thinking much about it until one of them approached him. "Are you Chen?" the man asked. Consulting his clipboard, Tommy looked confused. "No, sir. I'm Tommy Rivera. I work maintenance here." The man frowned. Looking at his paperwork again, he spoke quietly into his microphone, waited for a response, then shrugged. "Close enough. We're running behind schedule." Before Tommy could ask what was happening, he felt a sharp sting in his neck. The world began to spin, colors bleeding together like watercolors in the rain. The last thing he remembered was wondering who would feed Mrs. Patterson's cat in the morning. When he woke up, everything had changed. The room was pure white, so bright it hurt his eyes. The bed felt like it was made from materials that didn't quite seem natural. There were no windows, no decorations, nothing that would tell him where he was or how he had gotten there. A voice came from speakers hidden somewhere in the ceiling. "Subject 100, you will remain in your quarters until summoned for orientation. Food and water are provided through the slot in your door. Do not attempt to leave your room." Tommy sat up slowly, his head still foggy from whatever they had given him. Subject 100? This had to be some kind of mistake. He was a janitor from East LA, not whatever these people thought he was. He tried the door, but it was locked. From the outside, the room had no phone, no way to contact anyone. Just a small slot near the floor where they had already pushed through a tray of food that looked like it came from a military cafeteria. As the hours passed, Tommy began to hear sounds from other rooms, footsteps in corridors, voices giving commands. Sometimes, sounds that might have been training exercises or might have been something else entirely. The walls were thick, but not thick enough to block out everything. On his second day, they came for him, the same men in suits, now joined by others wearing military uniforms without any identifying patches. They led him through corridors that seemed to stretch forever, past rooms filled with equipment he didn't recognize and people who moved with a precision that made his skin crawl. The orientation room contained 99 other people, and Tommy knew immediately that he didn't belong there. These weren't ordinary people who had been grabbed by mistake. These were individuals who looked like they had been carved from stone and lightning. Every one of them sat perfectly still, eyes constantly moving, evaluating threats and opportunities. They ranged in age from late teens to early 40s, but they all shared something that Tommy couldn't quite name: a hardness around the eyes, a way of holding themselves that suggested violence was always just beneath the surface. Men and women who had seen the worst the world had to offer, and had learned to become worse in return. Tommy found himself assigned to seat number 100, right at the back of the room, as Dr. Rodriguez began her presentation about their new purpose and their transformation into something greater. He caught fragments of conversations from the others. These people spoke in half sentences and code words, but Tommy understood enough to realize they were discussing the best ways to eliminate the guards, the structural weaknesses they had observed in the facility, and the probability of successful escape attempts. They weren't prisoners trying to get free. They were predators calculating their next move. Dr. Rodriguez explained that they had been chosen for their unique capabilities and their freedom from unnecessary emotional attachments. They would undergo 18 months of intensive training that would remake them into the perfect soldiers for a new kind of warfare. They would become ghosts, invisible and unstoppable, capable of changing the course of history with a single mission. As she spoke, Tommy realized with growing horror that this wasn't a mistake that would be corrected. These people believed he belonged here, among these human weapons who sat listening to descriptions of psychological conditioning and physical enhancement with the same attention most people gave to weather reports. When the orientation ended, and they were led back to their quarters, Tommy noticed something that chilled him more than anything else. The other 99 subjects walked in perfect formation without being told. They had already begun to move as a unit, thinking as a group mind rather than as individuals, Tommy stumbled slightly, still getting used to the strange feeling in his legs from whatever drugs they had used. One of the other subjects, a woman with scars covering her arms and dead eyes that seemed to look right through him, steadied him with a grip that could have crushed bones. "Stay alert," she whispered. "The weak ones don't survive the first month." Back in his room, Tommy sat on his narrow bed and tried to make sense of what was happening to him. Somewhere, the alarm that woke them every morning wasn't just loud. It was designed to trigger something deep in the human brain, something that made your heart race and your muscles tense. Before you were even fully awake, Tommy learned this on his first morning when he nearly fell out of bed, his body reacting to a sound that seemed to bypass his ears and go straight to his nervous system. Around him, the other 99 subjects were already moving, not the slow, confused movements of people waking up, but the instant alertness of individuals who had learned that being slow meant being dead. They dressed in identical gray uniforms and filed out of their rooms with military precision, even though no one had taught them to do this yet. Tommy struggled to keep up, still groggy and disoriented. The woman who had helped him the day before appeared beside him again. Her name tag read Subject 47, and Tommy realized that none of them were using real names anymore. They were numbers now, identities stripped away as easily as taking off a jacket. "First rule," she said quietly as they walked toward what looked like a cafeteria. "Never show weakness. They're watching everything we do, measuring how we respond. The ones who can't adapt won't be here much longer." The breakfast was strange. Not bad, exactly, but it tasted like it had been designed by scientists rather than cooks. Everything was perfectly balanced for nutrition and energy, but it lacked any hint of flavor or personality. Tommy found himself missing his morning coffee and the donuts Mrs. Patterson always offered him when he stopped by her apartment. Dr. Rodriguez appeared on screens throughout the eating area, her voice calm and professional as she explained their daily schedule. Physical conditioning at 0600, combat training at 0800, tactical analysis at 1000, psychological evaluation at 1200. The list went on. Every minute of their day planned and controlled. "Your previous lives are over," she said, her face filling the screens. "Everything you were before entering this facility is irrelevant. You are here to become something new, something necessary for the future of human civilization. Those who embrace this transformation will succeed. Those who resist will be removed from the program." Tommy noticed that she didn't say where the removed subjects would go. He had a feeling it wasn't back to their old lives. The first physical training session nearly broke him, while the other subjects moved through exercises that would have challenged Olympic athletes. Tommy struggled with basic movements, his muscles burned, his lungs felt like they were on fire, and sweat poured down his face like a waterfall. The instructor, a man built like a concrete wall with eyes like ice chips, watched Tommy's struggles with obvious disappointment. "Subject 100, he called out, making Tommy's failures visible to everyone in the room. "You're holding back the entire group. Either keep up or get out of the way." But something unexpected happened. Instead of the mockery or irritation Tommy expected from the other subjects, several of them began quietly helping him. Subject 23, a young man who moved like a dancer but had hands that looked like they had been through a meat grinder, showed him how to adjust his breathing. Subject 67, a woman who couldn't have been older than 20 but had the eyes of someone who had seen too much, demonstrated proper form for the exercises. The instructor noticed this too, and Tommy saw something flicker across his face that might have been surprise. These people had been chosen specifically because they worked alone, because they had no loyalty to anyone but themselves. Yet here they were, helping the weakest member of their group without being asked. The combat training was worse. Tommy had never thrown a punch in anger in his entire life. His idea of conflict resolution was talking things through over coffee and finding common ground. Here, they were teaching him how to disable an opponent in seconds, how to turn everyday objects into weapons, how to move through shadows without making a sound. He was terrible at it. While Subject 12 could take down 3 attackers simultaneously and Subject 89 could throw knives. With surgical precision, Tommy could barely manage a proper defensive stance. But again, something strange happened. The other subjects began pairing with him during exercises, teaching him techniques that the instructors had glossed over. "Why are you helping me?" Tommy asked Subject 47 during a water break. She was showing him how to escape from rope restraints. Patiently repeating the motions until his clumsy fingers could manage them, she paused, looking confused by her own actions. "I don't know," she said finally. "I've never helped anyone before, but watching you, it reminds me of something I thought I had forgotten." This pattern continued through weeks of training. Tommy remained the worst performer in almost every category, but something about his presence was changing the other subjects in subtle ways. They started talking to each other during meals instead of eating in silence. They began checking on squad members who got injured during training. Small acts of humanity that seemed to grow stronger the longer they were around Tommy. Dr. Rodriguez noticed these changes too. Tommy could see her watching him through the one-way windows that lined every training room. Sometimes she would call him to her office for what she called adjustment sessions. These involved sitting in a chair while machines monitored his brain activity, and she asked him questions designed to break down his resistance to the conditioning. "Why do you insist on maintaining your previous identity?" she would ask, her voice hypnotically calm. Tommy Rivera was a nobody, a janitor who cleaned up after other people's achievements. "We're offering you the chance to become something extraordinary." But Tommy's answers never changed. "I was somebody to Mrs. Patterson when she needed help with her groceries. I was somebody to the students who needed someone to listen. Being extraordinary doesn't matter if you stop being human." These sessions grew longer and more intense as the weeks passed. Dr. Rodriguez introduced drugs that were supposed to make him more compliant, more willing to let go of his past. Instead, they seemed to make his memories more vivid. He would spend hours remembering conversations with students, moments of connection with people whose names he might never have known, but whose lives he had touched in small ways. The other subjects were changing too, but in the opposite direction. The daily conditioning was working on them exactly as designed. They moved with increasing precision, spoke in shorter sentences, showed less emotion with each passing day. Their personalities were being filed away like old photographs, replaced with something cold and efficient. But around Tommy, traces of who they used to be would sometimes surface. Subject 23 mentioned that he had once wanted to be a teacher. Subject 89 admitted that she used to collect stray cats. Subject 47 revealed that her real name was Katie, and that she had once had a younger brother who died in a conflict she still couldn't talk about. These moments of humanity became more precious as they became more rare. Tommy realized that he was serving as some kind of anchor for these people, reminding them of aspects of themselves that the program was trying to erase. It wasn't something he was doing consciously. It was simply who he was, and somehow that was enough. The training grew more extreme as months passed. They learned to operate vehicles they had never seen before, to navigate in complete darkness, to remain awake and alert for days at a time. They studied languages, cultures, and political systems from around the world. They memorized the faces and habits of world leaders, military commanders, and corporate executives. Tommy struggled with all of it, but he kept trying, not because he wanted to become a weapon, but because giving up meant losing the chance to help the people around him hold on to their humanity. Every day that he remained Tommy Rivera, maintenance worker from East LA who cared about people, was a day that the others could remember what they had been. Before this place got its hooks into them, the psychological evaluations became daily occurrences. Dr. Rodriguez seemed frustrated by Tommy's continued resistance to the conditioning, but also fascinated by the effect he was having on the other subjects. Her notes, which Tommy glimpsed during one session, described him as an unprecedented anomaly and a potential contamination of the entire program. But she didn't remove him from training. Instead, she seemed determined to understand what made him different, what allowed him to maintain his identity while others lost theirs. Tommy suspected that her scientific curiosity was stronger than her desire for program efficiency. and that this curiosity might be the only thing keeping him alive. As their first year of training drew to a close, Tommy looked around at his fellow subjects and saw the terrible success of the Ghost class program. These people who had once shown him kindness and shared fragments of their past lives were becoming something else entirely. Their movements were perfectly coordinated, their responses completely predictable, their emotions virtually non-existent. Yet, sometimes, in quiet moments between exercises, he would catch glimpses of the people they had been. A smile that lasted half a second too long, a joke that slipped out before they could stop it, a moment of concern for an injured teammate that went beyond tactical necessity. Tommy realized that his role in this place wasn't to become a ghost. Like the others, it was to be a reminder that they had all been human once, and that humanity was something worth fighting to preserve, even in a place designed to destroy it completely. Graduation day arrived without fanfare or celebration. After 18 months of conditioning, the 99 subjects had transformed into something that barely resembled the people they had once been. They moved as one unit, thought as one mind, and responded to commands with mechanical precision that would have impressed any military command. Our Tommy watched from his assigned position as Dr. Rodriguez addressed the group for the final time. The woman he had known as Subject 47, Katie, stood 3 rows ahead of him. Her posture was perfect, her expression blank, her eyes focused on some invisible point beyond the walls. The person who had once helped him with rope knots and shared stories about her brother was gone, replaced by something that looked human but felt hollow. "You are no longer the people you were when you arrived here," Dr. Rodriguez announced, her voice echoing through the assembly hall. "You have been reborn as instruments of precision, tools of necessity for a world that requires difficult choices. You will be deployed individually to positions around the globe, where you will await activation and carry out missions that ordinary soldiers could never accomplish." Tommy felt sick listening to her words. These weren't soldiers being honored for their service. They were weapons being prepared for shipment, and everyone in the room except him seemed perfectly comfortable with that reality. The deployment ceremony was efficient and cold. Each subject received a sealed envelope containing their new identity, location, and cover story. They would blend into societies as business people, teachers, aid workers. Whatever role would give them access to their eventual targets. Some would wait months or even years before receiving their first mission, living ordinary lives while remaining ready to transform into something deadly at a moment's notice. Subject 12 was assigned to London as a financial consultant. Subject 23 would work as a translator in Geneva. Subject 89 became an art dealer in Hong Kong. One by one, Tommy watched people he had come to care about receive their orders to disappear into the world as sleeper agents. Katie approached him after receiving her assignment. For just a moment, her expression softened, and Tommy saw a flicker of the person she had been. "I remember you tried to help us stay human," she said quietly. "I want you to know that meant something, even if I can't feel it anymore." Then she was gone, walking toward the transport vehicles with the same measured pace as all the others. Tommy never saw her again, but he would think about that moment for the rest of his life. Dr. Rodriguez had special plans for Tommy, while the others were deployed to their new lives. He was transferred to a different section of the facility, one that looked more like a research hospital than a military installation. His room had windows now, though they only showed an inner courtyard surrounded by more concrete walls. "You present a unique opportunity," Dr. Rodriguez explained during their first session in the new location. "Your resistance to our conditioning methods could provide valuable insights for improving future iterations of the program. We're going to study exactly what makes you different and use that knowledge to create even better soldiers." Tommy realized he had become a laboratory specimen, a puzzle to be solved rather than a person to be trained. The days settled into a routine of tests, interviews, and medical examinations. Researchers prodded his brain with machines, analyzed his blood, and questioned him about his childhood, his relationships, his deepest fears and strongest memories. Meanwhile, reports began filtering back from the deployed subjects. At first, Everything went according to plan. The ghosts integrated seamlessly into their assigned roles, establishing cover identities and awaiting orders. Their handlers were pleased with how perfectly they had adapted to civilian life, while maintaining their lethal capabilities. But after 6 months, disturbing patterns began to emerge. Subject 31, deployed as an aid worker in Somalia, had completed his assigned mission, but then continued targeting people who weren't on his list. Security cameras caught him in moments that suggested he was enjoying the work more than he should have been. Subject 76, working as a museum curator in Paris, had been activated for a simple intelligence gathering operation instead of the clean, surgical approach he had been trained for. He left behind a scene that looked like the work of someone who had completely lost control. The target was eliminated, but so were 12 other people who had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Dr. Rodriguez showed Tommy surveillance footage from around the world. Her face pale as she explained what they were seeing. They're evolving beyond their programming, she said. Without the structure of the facility, without the daily conditioning sessions, they're becoming something we never intended. Tommy watched the grainy video of people he had once tried to help, now moving through the world like shadows of destruction. Some had disappeared entirely from their assigned positions, vanishing into criminal underworlds or creating their own networks of violence. Others had begun targeting people for reasons that had nothing to do with their missions, following impulses that their conditioning had supposedly eliminated. This is what happens when you strip away everything that makes someone human, Tommy said quietly. You can't control what grows back in its place. The research facility became busier as more reports came in. Government officials in dark suits arrived for emergency meetings. Phone calls were made to agencies whose names Tommy didn't recognize. There was talk of containment protocols and damage assessment, words that sounded clinical but carried the weight of terrible decisions. Dr. Rodriguez seemed to age years in the span of weeks. The program that had been her life's work was turning into a global nightmare, and she was beginning to understand that Tommy's failure to adapt might have been the only successful outcome of the entire project. We removed their capacity for normal human connection, she admitted during one of their sessions. We thought that would make them more focused, more reliable. Instead, it made them unpredictable in ways we never anticipated. They have no moral framework left to guide their decisions. Tommy spent his days in the research facility thinking about his fellow subjects, wondering what they were doing and whether any trace of their original selves remained. Sometimes he would hear fragments of news reports that might have been connected to ghost activities. A corporate executive found dead in his locked office with no signs of forced entry. A political leader who changed his position on a critical vote overnight and then suffered a mysterious accident. A journalist who stopped investigating government corruption and retired to a remote location where no one could find him. The facilities staff began looking at Tommy differently as the scope of the problem became clear. He wasn't just a research subject anymore. He was proof that their methods had been fundamentally flawed from the beginning. The one person who had resisted their conditioning was the only one who had remained predictably human. Late at night, Tommy would lie in his bed and think about Mrs. Patterson. Was she still alive? Had anyone checked on her cat? His old life felt like something from a dream, impossibly distant and innocent compared to the reality he now understood. He had been accidentally swept into humanity's most dangerous experiment, and somehow he had become the control group that proved the experiment was a failure. But he also knew that somewhere out in the world, 99 people who had once shown him kindness were now struggling with the consequences of having their humanity surgically removed. They weren't monsters by choice. They were victims of a program that had tried to create perfect soldiers, and instead created perfect examples of what happens when science forgets that some things about human nature shouldn't be changed. Dr. Rodriguez began spending more time with Tommy, not as a researcher studying a subject, but as someone seeking answers to questions that kept her awake at night. Is there any way to reach them? She asked. Any way to restore what we took away? Tommy considered the question carefully. He thought about Katie's moment of recognition before she left. about the small acts of humanity he had witnessed during training, about the spark of connection that had survived 18 months of systematic conditioning. Maybe, he said finally, but it would mean admitting that the strongest thing about people isn't what makes them good soldiers, it's what makes them good neighbors, good friends, good human beings. And someone would have to be willing to risk everything to remind them of that. As he spoke these words, Tommy realized that he wasn't just describing a theoretical possibility. He was describing what might become his own mission. Should anyone be brave enough to give him the chance, somewhere out there, his friends were lost in a darkness that the Ghost class program had created, and he might be the only person left who remembered the light they had carried before it was systematically extinguished. The emergency meeting happened at 3 in the morning, which told Tommy everything he needed to know about how desperate things had become. Through his window, he could see black vehicles arriving at the research facility, carrying people whose faces never appeared on television, but whose decisions shaped the world. Dr. Rodriguez came to his room personally, something she had never done before. Her usually perfect appearance was disheveled, her hands shaking slightly as she spoke. "We need your help, Tommy. The situation has become critical." She led him through corridors he had never seen before, to a conference room filled with screens showing maps, photographs, and video footage from around the globe. The people seated around the table looked like they hadn't slept in days, their faces grim as they studied reports that painted a picture of controlled chaos spreading across continents. 73 confirmed incidents in the past month, announced a man in a military uniform without any identifying badges. "Our assets have gone completely off mission. They're operating according to their own agendas now, and we have no way to control them." The screen showed security camera footage that made Tommy's stomach turn, not because of graphic violence, but because he recognized the precise, efficient movements of people he had once called friends. Subject 45 walking calmly through a corporate office building in Tokyo, leaving behind a boardroom full of executives who would never wake up. Subject 67 disappearing into the crowded streets of Mumbai after completing a mission that was supposed to be surveillance only. "Traditional law enforcement is useless," continued another official. "These people know our tactics, our procedures, our weaknesses. They were trained by us. Every time we send teams after them, those teams don't come back." Tommy watched footage of a SWAT team entering an abandoned warehouse in Detroit. The cameras showed them moving professionally, covering each other, communicating through hand signals. Then the feed cut to static. When it resumed, the warehouse was empty except for equipment scattered across the floor. No bodies, no blood, no sign of what had happened to 12 trained officers. "How many are still out there?" Tommy asked quietly. Dr. Rodriguez consulted her tablet. 87 are unaccounted for. 12 have been confirmed, neutralized, but only after causing significant collateral damage. The rest have simply vanished. They could be anywhere, doing anything. The man at the head of the table leaned forward, studying Tommy with eyes that had seen too many classified briefings. "Dr. Rodriguez believes you might be able to reach them. That your unique response to the conditioning could allow you to communicate with them in ways we cannot." Tommy understood what they were really asking. They wanted him to hunt his former friends, to use whatever connection he might still have with them to lead these people to their targets. The idea made him feel sick, but he also knew that every day the situation continued, more innocent people would suffer. "What you're talking about isn't hunting," Tommy said. "It's trying to save them." "There's a difference." The officials exchanged glances. This clearly wasn't the response they had expected. "Mr. Rivera," one of them said carefully, "these individuals represent a clear and present danger to global security. Our primary objective is containment." "Your primary objective should be remembering that they're people," Tommy replied. "People who were taken against their will and turned into something they never chose to become. If you just want to eliminate them, you don't need me. If you want to help them, then we need to approach this completely differently." Dr. Rodriguez supported Tommy's position, though he could see the doubt in her eyes. She had created these weapons, and now she was being asked to trust the one person who had refused to become one. The psychological profiles suggest that Subject 100's presence might trigger recognition responses in the others. If anyone can reach them, it would be him. The debate continued for hours. Military officials wanted strike teams and elimination protocols. Intelligence agencies preferred surveillance and capture operations. Tommy insisted that any approach based on force would fail, because the subjects had been trained to expect and counter exactly those tactics. Let me try to talk to one of them first, Tommy proposed, not as bait, not as part of some trap. Let me try to reach whoever's closest and see if any part of who they used to be is still there. The room fell silent. What Tommy was suggesting was essentially suicide. These people had been turned into perfect weapons, and he wanted to walk up to one of them with nothing but words and hope. But as more reports came in throughout the day, the officials began to realize they had few other options. Subject 23 had taken control of a criminal organization in Eastern Europe, using methods that terrified even hardened mobsters. Subject 89 had disappeared into the financial district of London, and 3 major bank executives had died in what looked like accidents, but followed patterns too precise to be coincidental. The first mission was approved reluctantly. Intelligence had tracked Subject 34 to a small city in Japan, where he had been operating as an English teacher while apparently running some kind of side business that local authorities couldn't identify. Surveillance suggested he was still maintaining his cover identity, which meant there might be enough of his original personality intact for Tommy to reach. Tommy spent a week preparing, studying everything they knew about Subject 34's background and current activities. His real name had been David Chen, a former Special Forces medic who had been captured during a mission that officially never happened. During training, he had been one of the few subjects who showed genuine concern when Tommy struggled with the physical conditioning. The flight to Tokyo felt surreal. Tommy hadn't left the research facility in over 2 years, and the world outside looked different than he remembered. People moved differently, talked differently, as if the existence of the Ghost program had somehow changed the atmosphere, even though no one knew it existed. His handlers equipped him with communication devices and tracking equipment, but no weapons. If Subject 34 wanted to hurt him, nothing they could give him would make a difference. His only protection was the hope that somewhere inside the perfectly conditioned mind of a professional weapon, David Chen still existed. The school where Subject 34 worked was exactly the kind of place that would provide perfect cover. A small private language academy in a quiet neighborhood, where a polite foreign teacher could come and go without attracting attention. Tommy watched from across the street as classes ended, and students filed out, chatting and laughing like students everywhere. Subject 34 emerged at exactly 4:30 p.m. His movements precise, but not obviously threatening. He looked like any other teacher heading home after a long day, except for something in the way he scanned the street that suggested constant awareness of potential threats. Tommy followed at a distance, his heart pounding as he tried to figure out how to approach someone who could probably end his life before he finished saying hello. The subject stopped at a small cafe, ordered coffee in perfect Japanese, and sat at a table near the window. Taking a deep breath, Tommy walked into the cafe and sat down across from him. For a moment, Subject 34's face showed no recognition. His eyes assessed Tommy as a potential threat, calculating distances and escape routes. Then something shifted. A flicker of confusion that suggested buried memories trying to surface. "You're Subject 100, he said quietly in English. "You're supposed to be in the facility." "My name is Tommy Rivera," Tommy replied. "And your name is David Chen. You wanted to be a doctor before all this happened. You told me that during one of our training sessions, back when you were still you?" The confusion in Subject 34's eyes deepened. For just a moment, Tommy saw the person who had once helped him with combat exercises, who had shared stories about wanting to help people instead of hurt them. Then the moment passed, and the professional mask slipped back into place. "That person doesn't exist anymore," Subject 34 said. "Whatever you think you remember, it's not real." But Tommy had seen the recognition, had felt the connection that still existed beneath the conditioning. for the first time since the Ghost program began. He had real hope that his friends weren't completely lost. "Yes, he does," Tommy said quietly. "He's still in there, David, and I'm going to help you find him." The conversation with David in that Tokyo cafe lasted 3 hours, and by the end of it, Tommy knew he had found something the program's creators thought they had completely destroyed. David remembered things, not everything and not clearly, but fragments of who he had been before the facility were still there, buried under layers of conditioning like treasures hidden in deep water. "I dream about helping people sometimes," David admitted as they sat in the empty cafe, the owner politely ignoring them as closing time approached. "I wake up confused because the dreams feel more real than my actual life. In the dreams, I'm saving people instead of—" He stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Tommy spent the next 2 weeks in Tokyo, meeting David every day after his teaching job ended. Slowly, carefully, he helped David remember pieces of his original self. The process was like watching someone recover from a serious injury, with good days and bad days, progress and setbacks. The breakthrough came when David mentioned having trouble sleeping. Tommy suggested they visit a local hospital, not for any official reason, just to walk through the halls. David's reaction was immediate and powerful. Surrounded by doctors and nurses helping patients, something inside him seemed to wake up. His posture changed, his voice became warmer, and for almost an hour, he spoke about his dreams of becoming a medic with the same passion he had shown years earlier during training. But the success in Tokyo also created new problems. Other subjects around the world seemed to sense that something had changed. Intelligence reports suggested they were becoming more active, more aggressive, as if David's awakening had somehow disturbed their collective programming. Dr. Rodriguez called Tommy back to the facility for an emergency briefing. "Something's happening that we don't understand," she explained, showing him surveillance footage from multiple countries. "The remaining subjects are exhibiting coordinated behavior patterns. They're communicating with each other somehow, sharing information." The screen showed subjects in different cities acting in ways that suggested they knew what their counterparts were doing thousands of miles away. Subject 67 in Mumbai had changed her routine at exactly the same time Subject 45 in Tokyo had gone underground. Subject 12 in London had abandoned his cover identity within hours of Tommy's first contact with David. "It's like they're all connected," Dr. Rodriguez continued. "The conditioning created some kind of network effect that we never anticipated. When you reach David, you may have triggered responses in all of them." Tommy realized with growing dread that his success might have made the situation worse. By helping one subject remember his humanity, he had somehow alerted the others that their conditioning was vulnerable. Now they were gathering, preparing for something that no one could predict. The situation escalated rapidly. Reports came in of subjects abandoning their cover identities worldwide and beginning to move toward unknown destinations. Financial records showed purchases of weapons, vehicles, and equipment that suggested they were planning something coordinated and devastating. "We think they're coming here," announced the same military official who had first briefed Tommy. "Satellite imagery shows movement patterns converging on this region. They know you're the key to whatever's happening to them, and they want to stop it." The facility went into lockdown mode. Reinforcements arrived, bringing military equipment that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie. The underground complex was sealed, with guards posted at every entrance and sensors monitoring every approach route. Tommy found himself at the center of preparations for a battle that no one was sure they could win. These weren't ordinary soldiers they were facing. These were people who had been trained using the same methods, the same intelligence, the same resources as the facility's current defenders. They knew every weakness, every potential failure point. But Tommy had a different idea. "What if we don't fight them?" he suggested during a strategy meeting. "What if we let them come, and I try to reach them the same way I reached David?" The room erupted in protests. Military commanders explained in detailed terms why this would be suicide. Intelligence officials presented analysis showing that the subjects were beyond reasoning with. Dr. Rodriguez herself argued that the approaching subjects were too far gone. too completely conditioned to respond to appeals to their humanity. Tommy listened to all of their objections, then quietly said, "They're coming here because they're scared. The conditioning taught them to eliminate threats, and they see me as a threat to their programming. But underneath that programming, there's still people who once chose to help each other during training. If I can remind them of that, maybe we can end this without anyone else getting hurt." The debate continued for hours, but eventually Tommy's position won, partly because the alternatives seemed hopeless. The facility's defenses might stop some of the approaching subjects, but probably not all of them. And even if they succeeded in eliminating the immediate threat, there were still dozens of other subjects scattered around the world, who would continue to pose dangers to innocent people. The attack came at dawn, 3 days later, but it wasn't the violent assault everyone expected. Instead, the subjects simply appeared in the facility's corridors. Having bypassed security systems that should have been impossible to penetrate, they moved like ghosts, silent and invisible until they chose to be seen. Tommy met them in the main assembly hall where their journey had begun 2.5 years earlier. 87 subjects stood before him, their faces blank and their postures perfectly aligned. They looked like an army of identical soldiers, except Tommy could see the individuals hidden underneath the conditioning. "I know you remember me," he said, his voice echoing in the large room. "I know you remember helping me during training, sharing stories about who you used to be, showing kindness when the instructors weren't watching." For a moment, nothing happened. Then Subject 23, the former translator, stepped forward slightly. His voice was emotionless, but Tommy caught a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "You're trying to break our programming. We can't allow that." "I'm trying to give you back your choices," Tommy replied. "The program took away your ability to decide who you wanted to be. I'm offering to help you remember." What followed wasn't a battle in any traditional sense. It was a conversation that lasted hours, with Tommy speaking to the group about specific moments he remembered from their training. He talked about Subject 67's cats, about Subject 89's art collection, about dozens of small details that proved these people had once been individuals with hopes and dreams and fears. Slowly, cracks began to appear in their unified front. Some subjects began looking at each other instead of staring straight ahead. Others shifted their weight from foot to foot, showing the first signs of individual movement they had displayed since arriving. The breakthrough came when Katie, the woman, who had been Subject 47, suddenly stepped out of formation. Tears were streaming down her face as she looked at Tommy with recognition that went beyond their shared experience in the facility. "I remember," she said quietly. "I remember having a brother. I remember wanting to protect people instead of hurting them. I remember being human." Her words seemed to break a dam. One by one, other subjects began stepping forward, their faces showing emotion for the first time in years. Not all of them, and not completely, but enough to prove that Tommy's faith in their remaining humanity had been justified. Dr. Rodriguez watched from the observation room, taking notes on what she was witnessing. Later, she would write that the subjects' recovery wasn't immediate or complete. Many of them struggled for years to fully reclaim their identities, and some never completely overcame their conditioning. But enough of them found their way back to humanity to prove that even the most systematic attempts to destroy human nature could not completely succeed. Tommy never returned to his old life as a janitor at Valley Community College. Instead, he worked with the recovered subjects, helping them rebuild their sense of self and find ways to use their abilities to help rather than harm. Some became counselors, helping other victims of trauma. Others joined humanitarian organizations, using their skills to protect people in dangerous situations. The Ghost Class facility was eventually shut down, its existence buried in classified files that would remain secret for decades. Dr. Rodriguez spent the rest of her career studying the ethical implications of human enhancement, becoming one of the world's leading advocates for protecting human dignity in scientific research. Years later, Tommy would receive letters from people around the world, former subjects who had built new lives for themselves. They thanked him not for saving them, but for reminding them that they were worth saving, in a world that had tried to turn them into weapons. He had helped them remember that their greatest strength was their humanity. The Ghost class program had succeeded in creating 99 perfect soldiers, but it had failed to account for the one imperfect human being who proved that perfection without humanity was worthless. Tommy Rivera, the maintenance worker who had been in the wrong place at the right time, had become something the program's designers never intended to create. Proof that the human spirit, once awakened, could overcome any attempt to destroy it.